Hello, everyone. Good morning. How are you? Hope you're doing well. Make sure, please, ladies and gentlemen, that we take our seats. Let's get nice and quiet for the start of class. Spit out your gum. No hats, please. No hoods. Take your hoods off, okay? Thank you very much. Is that joke getting old? I can't tell. I can't tell anymore. But we're here for another day and the second part of our lessons on music during the Renaissance. Last time we talked about two composers. We mentioned, who did we mention? We mentioned Josquin des Prez, as well as Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina. Very awesome composers. Today, we are going to stay in the Renaissance, of course, but we're going to, let's see, Palestrina was from Italy, and Josquin was from France, but worked mainly in Italy, in Rome and in Milan. So we're going to travel from Italy. We're going to get in our little Leonardo da Vinci flying machine, and we're going to fly up to England. Place where they speak English, a place where, right? That would make sense. A place that had its own very unique culture during the Renaissance. And we're going to talk about two English composers from the Renaissance. And I was going to talk about a third one today, but I think I'm going to leave that off. The third person who we were going to talk about today was Claudio Monteverdi, who if you remember in our first video, I mentioned is a very important composer because he kind of has a foot in each of the, or in both the Renaissance and the Baroque period. So I think what we'll do is we will treat him more like an early Baroque composer because that's what he was, and we'll wrap up the Renaissance today. So this time, so that way, we can have a quiz on the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So that will be our that kind of medieval Renaissance quiz, okay? And or actually, I totally misspoke. We're not going to have a quiz on that. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of a project on the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, okay? So my hair is like all messed up. Wait, I'm not supposed to say that out loud. Okay, sorry about that. All right, anyway, so we're going to have a project coming up, and I'll assign that in our next class after today. So, but, needless to say, notes are going to be very important, so you want to take your notes and submit them, okay? Make sure that you submit your notes for this lesson so I can keep track of who is doing the work. And I'll have another announcement at the end of the lesson. So here we go. The Renaissance, part 2, part 2. Here it is. So the first composer we're going to talk about is the great English composer John Dowland. Okay. He is a very well-known composer during his time. He's actually really one of the first celebrities, I guess if you want to call it that we have. It was not always the case that in the Renaissance that people would hear music and know who the composer was. We had a lot of anonymous. A lot of the music was just folk music, songs that had been passed down for generations. So very rarely would a person in the Renaissance know the name of the person who wrote the music that they were listening to. Maybe if you were like in the nobility class, you might, but most people who were not, most people were poor, they certainly would not. Okay, but anyway, John Dowland was born and raised and lived all his life in England, although he did leave England for the European continent many times during his life for work-related things, right? Working in other countries, writing music for different people. Okay. He wrote purely secular songs meant for leisure time. Okay, so so obviously we're talking about the nobility here, right? During the Renaissance, we still are having the vestiges of feudalism, right? People working, belonging to the land, living and working on the land. So for most people, there was very little leisure time. Okay, but for the nobility class, there were, they did have leisure time. So this was, mainly music for people like that. Oh my good folks, this is a mess. I deeply apologize. Sorry about that. Okay, so he wrote mainly purely secular songs. In other words, he was not a composer of religious music. He wrote all songs about all sorts of different stuff, but many, if not most of his songs dealt with the medieval concept of courtly love. Remember we talked about courtly love? We had the courtly love was a question on that medieval quiz that we took. So yeah, courtly love, this idea of a knight being in love with a fair maiden, and then but not acting on the love out of a sense of nobility. That by the Renaissance, that had gone away to a large degree. It was it still hasn't fully gone away, right? This is just like it's a convention that we still see in literature today, but what it connected more to was this idea of unrequited love, that you love someone but they don't love you back, right? And just the pure pain and agony that that causes you when you deeply, passionately love someone, but they kind of throw it back in your face. They reject you. They leave you on red, right? That's well, obviously they didn't have that back in the Renaissance, but that's kind of our modern understanding of it, I guess. The music that he wrote was meant to be sung by a solo singer, so one person singing with lute accompaniment. Okay, and if you don't know, a lute is the Renaissance forerunner to the guitar. It looks kind of like a guitar, except the body of it is more oval shaped. It's got a big long neck that comes like out to here, and then you have someone would play the lute. Sometimes you'll see that this is a solo singer, and then there's a separate person who plays the lute. But this music was also written so that you could accompany yourself on the lute while you sang the song. So it was done both ways. He wrote dozens and dozens of songs. He had 4 full books worth of songs, and just dozens and dozens of songs in there. And he was known throughout Europe, right? He wasn't just known in England. Maybe he was kind of he had like the hometown advantage there, where he was really famous in England, but he was super famous all throughout Europe. And like I said, he was one of the first true celebrities. Everyone knew who John Dowland was, right? Back in those, the only celebrities really that everyone would know would be like, the king or queen, and probably the Pope, and that would be it. There wouldn't be, or I guess maybe your lord, your vassal, your whatever, your baron, your local baron. Support your local baron. You would, people would know people like that, but they wouldn't just know like some guy who wrote music. But John Dowland, everyone knew John Dowland. So below, I want you to check out a couple of John Dowland's songs. I've linked some of my favorites. Okay, number 1 is a song called "Flow My Tears," a real tearjerker, You'll see that a lot with Dallin. As I said, his songs mainly dealt with this idea of unrequited love. So they uh, they were extremely popular, but they're not too happy. It's all about loving someone and making a fool out of yourself for that person, and then they don't love you back. And sometimes it's not even just like they don't love you back. Sometimes the people in the song uh, are like they harshly reject the person and are way, 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 way mean to them. So that comes through in the song. So check out "Flow My Tears," okay, and check out the version I have here with the lutist accompanying the singer. And then the other one is probably my favorite John Dowland song. It's one that I've sang many times. It's called "Come Again, Sweet Love Doth Now Invite." It's a really interesting song. It kind of mixes these emotions of misery, but because it's the person loves the other person, it's there's these kind of these words like sweet and loving and things like that, but they're mixed with these opposite words. So I'm trying to think of like a line from the song. It's like, as I come again, sweet love doth now invite, to my unkind disdain to do me do. Oh yeah, to die with thee again in endless misery. I mean, that's just like one of the songs, but it sounds so sweet, But he's talking about endless misery. So anyway, check that out. That version, the guy's being accompanied by a guitar, not a lute. So don't be confused by that. It's just a modern performance. I guess the guy didn't have his lute handy, so he used his guitar. So that's a little anachronistic. You wouldn't have seen a guitar back in those days, but for our purposes, it's okay, just to get an idea of what the song sounds like. All right, let's move on. So the next composer from the Renaissance we're going to talk about is William Byrd. But before we talk about William Byrd, we have to kind of get into the circumstances under which he was writing music, the historical circumstances. So last class we talked about Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation. We listened to Eine feste Bürger unser Gott, right? And we compared that to the Palestrina. We talked about the differing opinions on how polyphony, when and even if it should be used at all. If it was better to have simple melodies that everyone could sing. So that was the Protestant Reformation that really started in Germany, but that took place throughout the European continent, right? Europe proper. Across the channel there in England and in the United Kingdom, the Reformation didn't really take root there for a while. It was holding steadfast against, England was remaining a Catholic country. And then we get to this guy, King Henry VIII. Maybe you've heard of him. So this is known as the English Reformation, okay? He was a Catholic monarch, just like most monarchs in Europe at that time. But he had a problem. His problem was he wanted a male heir to leave his kingdom to. Okay, he was really kind of obsessed with like his legacy, who was going to take power, take over his kingdom when he passed away. And he wasn't close to passing away, but there was just something that he was always thinking about, right? And he wanted a male heir. He wanted a son to be king after him. The problem with this is that his wife, Catherine of Aragon, was not successful in providing a son for King Henry VIII. So King Henry VIII, wanted to have his marriage annulled. An annulment, see, this is where we get into a little bit of tricky territory here, because um, most of us are familiar with the concept of divorce, but back in these days, especially as a Catholic monarch, King Henry VIII would not have sought a divorce because that would not have been permitted by the church. What was permitted by the church in certain circumstances is you could get what's called an annulment. In other words, the marriage would be dissolved, and actually what happens during an annulment is that it is determined that the marriage actually never happened. Maybe you had the wedding, maybe you said I do, right? But certain circumstances were such that the marriage was not valid, okay? And you appeal to whatever the bishops, whatever, and if they have like a tribunal and they come out with a decision on whether or not the marriage can be annulled. So as the King Henry went straight to the Pope. However, the Pope declined. He said, sorry, this is a valid marriage and you're not getting your annulment. So this enraged King Henry VIII. So what he decided to do is he said, I'm going to make my own church where I'm the Pope. And that's basically, I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but that's basically what happened. He broke away from the Catholic Church, started his own church called the Church of England, also sometimes called the Anglican Church. And unlike the Reformation of Martin Luther, the English Reformation kept many of the same conventions and institutions that the Catholic Church had, but it simply just placed the reigning monarch as the head instead of the Pope. Okay. This gave King Henry VIII the authority he needed to pursue his divorce and marry the young handmaiden Anne Boleyn. We won't get into what happened with Anne Boleyn, but let's just say that King Henry was married several times during his life, and infamously, many of his wives would be executed. Beheaded, to be specific, but you can do your own research if you're interested on how and why that happened, okay? I'm not going to get into it here. Because we are a music class, so why are we learning about this at all? This is very interesting, Mr. Joseph, but this does not have to do with music. Well, a couple of things. Number one, King Henry VIII actually wrote some music. He actually wrote a very, very well-known song, Renaissance song, that you might have actually heard before. And maybe you have just happened upon it. Maybe you've heard it at the Great Renaissance Fair in Tuxedo Park, New York. Raise your hand if you've gone to the, you know what, leave me leave a comment. Don't leave a private comment, just leave a comment below, a public comment, if you've gone to the Renaissance Fair in Tuxedo Park. Man, when this is all over, that's one of the first places I'm going. And I'm going to get a nice big turkey leg and just go to town. That's what I'm talking about. All right, but anyway, the song I'm talking about is called Greensleeves, and I am posting a link to that below so you can give a listen to a song written by King Henry VIII himself. So that part of it has to do with music, but really why we're talking about this is because, next, we have to set the stage for the world that our next composer, William Byrd, is living in. In order for us to truly appreciate William Byrd, you needed to know all that information about the English Reformation. Okay? So William Byrd, born circa 1540, died in the year 1623. He composed music during the reign of Elizabeth I, who was the daughter of King Henry VIII. He wrote music for Anglican services for the Church of England, but he later became Catholic, and wrote many motets and mass settings. So this is why it's a big deal, okay? William Byrd converts to Catholicism in the 1570s. And this is a period of time in history which is called the penal times in England. Stop laughing. It was called the penal times in England because of the penalties against the Catholic Church. All right. So basically, the Catholic Church was illegal in England during this time. People caught practicing the Catholic faith were fined, jailed, and sometimes even executed, depending on repeat offenses, and especially if you were clergy. So basically, if you were a Catholic priest in England and you were found out to be a Catholic priest, they would have just chopped your head off on the spot. Not on the spot. They probably would have had like a fake trial or something and then did it. Someone was even thrown in jail because they were found to be carrying sheet music written by William Byrd. So this is how seriously they were taking it. Okay, some guy had some music by William Byrd in like his on his person, and he was thrown in jail for that. So because of this, Catholics were forced underground. And when I say forced underground, I didn't mean they went into the sewers, right? You understand? They went, but they were forced to kind of fade back and go into hiding, I guess you could say. And they had to have their masses in secret. Now, why is this important? This is important because having your mass in secret meant that you couldn't have huge, large choirs like Palestrina did in Italy, where you have like dozens of people in your choir. You couldn't have that. You needed to have as few people as possible in case the authorities came knocking on the door. It's easy for a small amount of people to run away or to pretend, hey, we're having a party, don't mind us, we're not doing anything in here. So that was a lot easier with a few people than with a large group. And this is why William Byrd wrote his masses for 3 voices, for 4 voices, and for 5 voices only. Okay. So below, what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to listen to William Byrd's Mass for 5 voices. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. It's like, it's like over a half hour long, but if you want, maybe just listen to the first 5 minutes, okay? And then compare that to the first 5 minutes of Palestrina's Missa Pape Marcelli, the Pope Marcellus Mass. And just take a note of the smaller scale of Byrd's Mass. I think if you listen to both, you'll hear the Palestrina is on a much larger scale, and the William Byrd's Mass for 5 voices is a much, much smaller scale. Yet also, I want you to note just the beauty and simplicity of William Byrd's Mass, right? And just think too about what it would be like to, to be driven underground like that. I find that, to me, that makes the music even more powerful when you think about the history behind it and what people like William Byrd were going through during that time. All right, folks, so you know what to do now. I want you to submit your notes to me. You're also going to make sure you listen to all of the listening examples. I gave you the exception for the William Byrd Mass. You just have to listen to the first 5 minutes of that. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. Everything else, I would listen to the whole thing, though. And in our next class, we are going to get our project. The project is going to be on the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, okay? And then I will give you more information when I have you next. Remember, our new office hours are every Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. and they will happen live on Google Meet. So I will post the link right before we go live. So just make sure that you are available starting like around 1:25, 1:30. I'll post the link around that time, and then you can join in. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, or if you just want to stop in and say hello, that's fine too. We had a one the other day, and we had a couple people in there, and I did answer some questions, I addressed some concerns, but mostly we just kind of shot the breeze. It was it was nice to see people, so I want to encourage you to do that, even if it's just to see some familiar faces. It's a nice thing to do, right? And I'll be here for the whole half hour, and it can even go longer if we really needed to, but and of course I'll always answer your questions the traditional ways too. If you ask a question on Google Classroom or send an email, I'm happy to do that. But this is a special time for us to get together and to interact in a live way with each other. These videos are nice, I love talking. I love hearing the sound of my own voice, but it's just me talking to myself here, and hopefully you're getting something out of it on the other end. But we have this live situation. It's a way that we can interact live with each other, even if it's just to say hello. You can come late, you can leave early. It's all good on this end, but let's do it. Let's give each other a virtual high five. All right. If there's any questions, let me know. Anything else? Any questions from your guys' end? No? All right. Have a great day, and I will see you on the flip side.